As tensions in the Middle East escalate, households' budgets are set to feel the flow-on effects due to the ongoing conflict.
I told them to do the deal. They should have done the deal. Their cities have been blown to pieces. They've lost a lot of people. They should have done the deal. I told them, do the deal. So I don't know. I'm not too much in the mood to negotiate this.
Just 2 days after Israel bombed Iranian nuclear sites, oil prices shot up nearly 13%, hitting close to $80 a barrel, the biggest spike we've seen in over a year. But here's the real problem. Iran is now threatening to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow stretch of water that carries almost 20% of the world's oil. If that happens, this won't just be about higher prices at the pump. It'll be about no gas at all. Most gas stations in the US only have enough fuel to last 2 or 3 days. Our whole system, from refineries to delivery trucks, runs on razor-thin margin. If those oil tankers stop, gas stations across the country could run dry in less than 72 hours. That's not fear-mongering. That's the math. This isn't just some crisis happening halfway around the world.
If the US does get more involved, Iran is already warning it could cause chaos in global oil.
It's one that could hit your morning commute, your grocery bill, and your family's bottom line, and it's moving faster than anyone expected. The United States consumes around 20 million barrels of oil every single day, yet imports account for nearly 8 million of those barrels, a stunning dependence for a country that prides itself on energy security. But the real danger isn't just how much we import, it's how fragile our system is if even one global artery gets cut. Right now, all eyes are on the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly 20% of the world's oil supply flows daily. If Iran makes good on its threat to shut it down, the US doesn't have a backup plan, just a short fuse. Take the Strategic Petroleum Reserve SPR, once a reliable cushion in times of crisis. It's been drained to just 395 million barrels, barely 56% of its full capacity. At current consumption levels, that might cover between 19 to 47 days, but that's assuming no logistical issues, no refinery bottlenecks, and no panic buying. In reality, refineries operate near capacity, fuel deliveries run on razor-thin margins, and most gas stations only stock 2-3 days worth of fuel. There's no room for error and no time for delay. Experts from national security circles are sounding alarms if prices spike to $150 or worse. $200, $300 per barrel, the entire energy infrastructure could seize up. Not just oil companies, the trucking industry collapses, airlines cancel flights, agriculture halts, and shelves go empty. This isn't just about filling up your tank. This is about how food gets to your table, how medicine reaches your pharmacy, how power grids stay online. The bottom line, we've built an economy that runs on oil and assumes it will always be cheap, abundant, and on time. That assumption is now hanging by a thread, and America isn't ready. As missiles fly over the Middle East, Iran be preparing to unleash a different kind of weapon, one that doesn't involve warheads but could trigger global economic chaos. Lawmakers in Tehran are now openly debating the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow 21-mile waterway that quietly carries 1/5 of the world's oil supply. It's a move some analysts are calling the economic nuclear option. Why? Because it doesn't take an army to bring the global economy to its knees. Just a few mines, fast attack boats, or even the threat of closure is enough. Already, regional leaders are warning the US to take the threat seriously. Iraq's foreign minister recently stated that oil could spike to $200 or even $300 per barrel if the strait is shut for just a few days. That's not a forecast, that's a flashing red alarm. For context, oil was trading at around $75 or $80 in early June. A sudden quadrupling of prices would slam every supply chain tied to fossil fuels, from gas pumps to grocery aisles. And this time, Iran doesn't need to sink ships or fire missiles. If shipping insurers pull coverage as they did during past tensions, tankers won't sail. That alone could choke off the flow of millions of barrels per day, creating a real-world fuel shortage overnight. This is asymmetric warfare at its most dangerous. No battlefield, no declaration of war, just silence in the strait, and a ripple effect that could collapse the fragile balance of America's energy lifeline.
A threat would be a partial blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think a complete blockade is possible, but certainly a partial blockade. And I'm expecting to see a slowdown in the number of tankers transiting the strait just because of the conflict. Since President Trump has taken office, the price has come down from about $80 a barrel to the low 50s.
Iran knows the U.S. runs on oil, and if the Strait of Hormuz closes, it won't just be energy price spike, it'll be panic. This isn't just about gas prices going up, it's about the American way of life being shaken at its core. If oil hits $200 to $300 a barrel, filling a standard SUV could cost $400 to $500, a number so high that many Americans won't even be able to pay at the pump because most credit cards have transaction limits. That's not speculation, that's math. And when truckers can't afford diesel, they park their rigs. That alone could paralyze the country's supply chains within days. Delivery giants like FedEx and UPS are already warning about potential route suspensions if fuel costs spike. Grocery store shelves would begin to empty, not because there's no food, but because there's no way to move it. Hospitals could start rationing emergency vehicle use or even delay critical treatments due to fuel shortages. Police and fire departments, already stretched thin in many cities, may have to cut back on patrols and emergency response times. The danger goes beyond inconvenience. The U.S. operates on a razor-thin, just-in-time fuel and supply model. Most gas stations have only 48 to 72 hours of fuel on hand, and once word spreads that supplies are running low, panic kicks in. People top off their tanks daily, hoard fuel in containers, and flood social media with footage of long lines, creating a feedback loop of fear that accelerates shortages. This isn't a future threat, it's a current vulnerability. From suburban commuters to small-town farmers, from delivery drivers to first responders, everyone will feel it. And once the system buckles, it's not easily repaired. It's not about the price of gas anymore, it's about whether there will be any gas at all. That's the terrifying possibility Americans could be waking up to if this crisis in the Strait of Hormuz escalates.
I told them to do the deal. They should have done the deal. The cities have been blown to pieces. They've lost a lot of people. They should have done the deal. I told them, do the deal. So I don't know.
At this year's G7 summit in Alberta, the symbolism couldn't have been clearer. President Trump left the summit early, skipping key energy and trade discussions. Meanwhile, Canada's Mark Carney stayed and quickly became the focal point. European leaders like Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen didn't wait for Washington to return. Instead, they huddled with Carney to map out a new approach to global energy cooperation without the U.S. at the table. Behind closed doors, the shift was even starker. Canada's parliament quietly announced it would halt support for a major U.S. LNG export project unless Washington rolls back its steel tariffs. That's no small deal. It puts billions in transatlantic energy trade on ice. The message from Ottawa: the era of one-sided partnerships is over. A Canadian spokesperson put it bluntly on national television: "We can't build bridges if America keeps burning them." This isn't just about one summit or one pipeline. It's a pattern. From trade to energy to security, traditional allies are signaling that they no longer see the U.S. as a dependable partner. Trump's go-it-alone policies, tariffs, walkouts, and public rebukes may play well at home. But abroad, they're eroding trust, weakening alliances, and pushing allies to explore new coalitions that don't center around America. The question now is chilling. If even Canada, America's most integrated and cooperative ally, is willing to walk away, who's next? And can the U.S. regain its seat at the table before it finds itself completely on the outside looking in? Inside Washington, the alarms are no longer just blinking, they're screaming. But many now fear those warnings are coming far too late. National security analysts from the Strategic National Security Office, SNS, have issued urgent internal assessments warning that the United States is dangerously underprepared for the consequences of a total disruption in oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz. With tensions between Israel and Iran escalating, the possibility of Iran closing this critical choke point is no longer seen as theoretical. It's a live risk, and one the U.S. might not be able to withstand. The first point of failure: the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR. While it sounds like a national safeguard, the reality is sobering. At roughly 395 million barrels, the SPR sits at nearly 40% below its full capacity. According to internal simulations shared with the National Security Council, that stockpile would barely cover 19 to 47 days of national oil consumption under emergency conditions. But even that window assumes everything goes right. Flawless logistics, no hoarding, no natural disasters, and no major supply chain sabotage. If panic sets in, that timeline shrinks fast. And it's not just the quantity of oil, it's the infrastructure to move it. America's refining and distribution network are already operating at razor-thin margins, simply wasn't built to handle a sudden, prolonged global shock. This fragility isn't a secret. It's a known vulnerability that's now being acknowledged at the highest levels. Reports from the Atlantic Council and Barron's reveal that U.S. economic resilience depends on a just-in-time system that is efficient in times of peace, but brittle in times of stress. The entire structure of fuel distribution from Gulf Coast refineries to rural gas stations is built around assumptions of steady imports, cheap energy, and functional trade routes. Disrupt any part of that, and particularly the Strait of Hormuz, which moves 20% of global oil, and the system doesn't bend. It breaks. Within D.C., a classified briefing delivered to the National Security Council summed up the stakes in one stark line. We are not ready, not for $200 oil, not for fuel rationing, and not for a public backlash when the pumps run dry. The concern isn't limited to economics. The military depends heavily on fossil fuels to keep operations running. So do emergency services, hospitals, airports, and municipal systems. When the fuel dries up, so does the machinery of modern life. And beyond the logistical nightmare looms an even more unsettling threat, a crisis of confidence. If the U.S., the world's largest economy and self-proclaimed global leader, can't manage a foreseeable fuel shock, what message does that send to its allies? What leverage remains in future negotiations if even America's domestic infrastructure crumbles under pressure? This isn't alarmism, it's the dominant mood inside the Situation Room. Multiple policy advisors are now recommending immediate diplomatic engagement to de-escalate tensions in the Strait, emergency SPR release plans, and even federal intervention in fuel logistics if the crisis worsens. But the clock is ticking, and Washington is running out of time options and credibility. This is bigger than gas prices. It's about how fragile daily life in America has become and how quickly it could all unravel. If the Strait of Hormuz shuts down, we're not just looking at higher costs. We're looking at a nation stalled by fuel shortages, delivery breakdowns, and economic chaos. So, here's the real question. Do we release more from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and hope it buys time? Or do we face reality and engage diplomatically even with adversaries to prevent a total shutdown of the global oil artery? What do you think? Should the U.S. act now or risk everything? Drop your opinion in the comments. SPR release versus diplomacy. Share this with someone who drives to work, runs a small business, or relies on deliveries because this crisis affects all of us. Subscribe for fast updates as this situation unfolds, because if we wait for the gas stations to run dry, it's already too late.
The Prime Minister began this week talking trade and tariffs with U.S. President Donald Trump at the G7.
We must reinforce our strength at home and safeguard Canadian workers and businesses from the unjust U.S. tariffs that exist at present.
The main story, of course, is President Trump delivering on his threat to hit China, Canada, and Mexico with sweeping tariffs, import levies.
In just 30 days, Canada could raise retaliatory tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum, targeting an industry that supports jobs across 36 American states. Prime Minister Mark Carney made it clear, if no deal is reached, Ottawa will respond with force. The message: this isn't about diplomacy anymore. It's about damage control. And for the U.S., it's a double blow. First, it risks losing privileged access to its closest market. Second, it now faces rising political backlash at home from governors, mayors, and union leaders whose districts depend on steel exports to Canada. This isn't a warning shot, it's a loaded countdown, and Washington is running out of moves. Prime Minister Carney made it crystal clear Canada is done playing defense. If trade talks with Washington fail to deliver results by July 21st, Ottawa will raise retaliatory tariffs on American steel and aluminum, directly targeting industries across 36 U.S. states. But what's even more significant is how Canada is digging deeper, turning its own domestic economy into a geopolitical weapon. The first move: rewrite the rules of the game. Under new procurement reforms, only companies from Canada or countries with existing free trade agreements will be eligible to bid on major federal infrastructure, energy, and defense contracts. That means U.S. firms, despite being Canada's largest historical trading partner, would be excluded. From high-speed rail to clean energy grids to defense tech procurement, billions in opportunities are now walled off. And it doesn't stop there. Canada is imposing tariff rate quotas on steel imports from non-FTA countries, aiming to lock in price stability for domestic producers and blunt any supply shocks caused by global trade volatility. These quotas don't just protect Canada, They deprive foreign producers, including the U.S., of market share in a G7 economy. From the U.S. perspective, this is more than economic pushback. It's a calculated blow. American manufacturing giants, especially in states like Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, could lose out on lucrative contracts just as they're navigating increased input costs from domestic tariffs. U.S. firms aiming to expand into Canadian infrastructure or defense sectors will now find the door closed, or at best, heavily guarded. The message from Canada is subtle but brutal. If Washington won't play fair, Ottawa won't play at all. And it's not just about taxes or trade rules, it's about signaling that Canada is prepared to pivot, protect and prioritize its own industry, even if it means sidelining the U.S. in the process. If Trump continues to gamble on tariffs and brinkmanship, this may be one of the first dominoes to fall. And unlike in previous trade spats, this time the costs may land squarely in America's heartland.
We must reinforce our strength at home and safeguard Canadian workers and businesses from the unjust U.S. tariffs that exist at present. And that's why we're announcing that Canada will be introducing a series of countermeasures to protect Canadian steel and aluminum workers and producers.
Unlike Trump's tariff hikes that came overnight and caught allies off guard, Canada's countermeasures are designed with surgical precision. Ottawa isn't throwing punches just to make headlines. They're holding the line at a 25% retaliatory tariff for now. But the message is clear that number could climb if negotiations stall or fall if progress is made. It's not about punishment, it's about leverage. Behind the scenes, Canada has already laid the legal groundwork. New procurement rules and import quotas weren't drafted last minute. They've been in the works for months. These aren't emotional decisions. They're policy tools prepared in advance to activate depending on how the U.S. chooses to act. From a strategic lens, this approach does two things. First, it sends a signal to Washington that Ottawa isn't bluffing. The retaliation isn't just noise, it's functional, targeted, and structured for maximum pressure. Second, it gives Canada flexibility. By adjusting tariff levels based on negotiation progress, Carney's government keeps the door open, inviting diplomacy while holding a credible threat over American markets. From the U.S. perspective, this is a high-stakes wake-up call. If Trump continues to push unilateral demands, the cost won't just be in steel or aluminum, it'll be in lost access to public contracts, reduced export potential, and eroded business trust across the border. American companies that once relied on Canada as a stable partner are now facing unpredictability, ironically not from Ottawa, but from Washington itself. This is the difference between symbolic retaliation and structural deterrence. Canada isn't lashing out. It's laying traps quietly, calmly, and with legal precision. And unless the U.S. shifts course, those traps may soon spring shut. Canada isn't just fighting back with tariffs, it's redirecting entire supply chains. In response to U.S. aggression, Ottawa has unveiled a new strategy channeling billions in public infrastructure spending, defense housing, energy, and transportation for domestically produced steel and aluminum. The message is unmistakable. If the U.S. won't play fair, it won't get a seat at the table. This shift is more than symbolic. It's structural. Canada is rewriting procurement rules to exclude foreign firms unless they come from countries with reciprocal tariff-free trade deals. That effectively locks out U.S. companies from bidding on some of the country's biggest upcoming projects. Bridges, highways, power grids contracts worth tens of billions will now favor Canadian inputs and Canadian labor. At the same time, Canada's Ministry of Finance has opened a loan facility for large industrial firms affected by Trump's trade policies. This isn't just financial aid, it's a lifeline. Companies facing canceled U.S. contracts or higher cross-border costs can now pivot inward, sustain operations, and retool for new markets. From the U.S. side, the fallout is sharp and political. American producers are now squeezed at both ends. First, they're losing Canadian market share, a key export destination for U.S. metals. Second, they're being shut out of public contracts they once counted on. And with steel, aluminum, and construction-heavy states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin already politically volatile, the pressure on local lawmakers is mounting fast. Trump's trade war was meant to bring jobs home. But in Canada's case, it's doing the opposite. Cementing domestic industries, strengthening economic resilience, and forcing U.S. firms out of one of their most stable markets. In trying to control the game, Washington may have just written itself out of the next round. Mark Carney didn't shout. He didn't slam a table. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He set a deadline, July 21st. If there's no progress by then, Canada will escalate its retaliatory tariffs targeting U.S. metals and industries with surgical precision. The message? This isn't open-ended. This is a countdown. At stake is more than just trade. Carney made clear that the broader Canada-U.S. economic and security agreement, the very framework Trump wants to showcase as a win, is contingent on progress. No deal, no signature. And without that agreement, Canada is prepared to expand countermeasures with immediate effect. Stricter procurement rules, tighter import quotas, and wider industry support plans that deliberately exclude American firms. This isn't just policy, it's pressure. Carney has turned time into leverage. Washington can no longer delay or distract. The White House must either move toward resolution or prepare for escalation. In a matter of weeks, U.S. exporters, contractors, and investors could find themselves locked out of a G7 economy with over $100 billion in cross-border trade at stake. For Trump, this is a trap of his own making. The longer he waits, the fewer options remain. Canada is no longer waiting to be rescued by American goodwill. It's building its own exit plan. Quietly, assertively, and with a ticking clock, Ottawa has flipped the script. It's no longer America dictating terms. It's Canada defining deadlines. For 36 U.S. states, Canada isn't just a neighbor, it's a lifeline. From Pennsylvania's steel mills to aluminum foundries in Missouri and auto part factories in Michigan, exports to Canada sustain entire communities. We're talking about over $300 billion in annual cross-border trade with a huge share tied directly to U.S. manufacturing and energy. But now that access is rapidly slipping away. With Ottawa set to tighten procurement rules and threatening to escalate tariffs by July 21st, American manufacturers are no longer competing, they're bracing for impact. The implications reach far beyond trade numbers. Major U.S. contractors in construction, defense, and public infrastructure are finding themselves locked out of Canadian government projects they once dominated. From national housing developments to clean energy installations and defense procurement, the rules have changed. Only Canadian firms or those from countries with free trade agreements are being prioritized. That excludes most American bidders. In a matter of weeks, decades of North American industrial integration are being unwound. The consequences are already showing. Supply chains are stalling, multi-million-dollar deals are paused or redirected, and capital investments are being frozen across the Midwest and South. Executives aren't waiting to see what happens on July 21st, they're lobbying hard now. And it's not just the CEOs. Union leaders and small business owners are flooding congressional offices with the same urgent message: fix this. The political cost. It's stacking up fast. Senators and House representatives in states like Ohio, Wisconsin, and Alabama, many of whom rode into office on promises to protect domestic industry, are now caught in a bind. Loyal to Trump's trade brinkmanship or respond to the economic pain hitting their own backyards. With the 2026 midterms just months away, the choice is becoming increasingly untenable. For Trump, the real danger may not be diplomatic fallout with Canada, but a voter revolt at home. If Ottawa's countermeasures activate, they won't just disrupt exports. They'll expose a political fault line inside the U.S. between federal trade policy and local economic survival. The next time a senator speaks on tariffs, it might not be about punishing Canada. It could be about saving their seat. Canada isn't just retaliating, it's playing chess. With legal tools, economic leverage, and a ticking 30-day clock, Ottawa is forcing Washington to confront the cost of stubbornness. This isn't a trade spat anymore. It's a calculated test of will, and America may be the one boxed in. So now the question isn't whether Canada will act. They already have. The real question is, will the U.S. negotiate before the damage spreads further? Because if Trump keeps pushing, the next blow won't just hit foreign suppliers. It'll hit jobs in Ohio, contracts in Michigan, and voters across 36 states. What do you think? Should Trump accept a deal to protect American jobs or double down and risk more economic fallout? Join the conversation. Share this if you think the U.S. needs to rethink its strategy fast. Comment: should Trump negotiate now or stay the course? Subscribe to stay ahead of the next economic flashpoint hitting American workers.
Tomorrow, tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll start.
We're all already seeing the fallout of the auto tariffs with this 2-week shutdown at the Stellantis plant.
Like Napa Valley and Sonoma and Lodi, making it a top global wine producer. But the state wine industry is facing a significant slowdown.
Travel to the U.S. right now. Do you feel like your friends and family feel comfortable traveling there?
No, nobody I know.
What if your bills skyrocketed? Your hours got cut and your groceries suddenly cost double, yet no one could tell you why. Across the United States, working families are feeling the quiet sting of an economic war they never signed up for. President Trump's 2025 tariffs, marketed as a path to American greatness, are now projected to cost the average household up to $2,000 more per year, according to multiple economic estimates. But this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about the cold reality at the checkout line, the silence after canceled shifts, and the frustration of watching a full cart turn into an unaffordable luxury. From wine bottles collecting dust on store shelves to energy bills spiking in winter, every corner of daily life is feeling the squeeze. And it's not isolated. It's spreading like a quiet crisis cloaked in patriotic language, but leaving real people to pick up the tab. There's no recession, no war, no pandemic. So why does it feel like everything is falling apart? Welcome to the invisible cost of a trade war. And the worst part, we're just getting started. At factories across Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, the mood has shifted from pride to unease, from stability to fear. Workers at GM Stellantis and their countless suppliers are no longer asking when the next raise is coming, but whether their next paycheck will arrive at all. Overtime hours have vanished, production lines are stalling, and the tension is so thick it's drawing comparisons to the darkest days of the COVID-19 lockdowns. Yet this time there is no virus, no emergency health order, only a political decision with economic aftershocks. Trump's 25% auto tariffs have disrupted the cross-border supply chains that once flowed with precision. Parts now arrive late or not at all. Plants hesitate to invest, suppliers delay contracts, and employees brace for cuts that seem inevitable. For an industry that once symbolized the strength of the American middle class, this growing instability is more than just a cost of doing business. It is a signal loud and clear that the foundation is starting to crack. Behind the noise of tariff headlines, a quieter crisis is unfolding in everyday life. Small businesses across the U.S., especially in New England and New York, are struggling with soaring input costs.
Rising U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum are now driving up the cost of auto insurance. The Insurance Bureau of Canada says higher tariffs mean more expensive replacement parts, leading to price.
You make a decision, do I buy my kids a gallon of milk and eggs, or do I get my brakes fixed? Do I pay my rent, or do I get my transmission replaced? It becomes very tough decisions for people to make.
Steel, aluminum, and auto parts now come with price tags inflated by trade war fallout, and the impact is immediate. Repair shops are charging more. Home builders are postponing projects. Families are paying hundreds more to fix their cars, heat their homes, or replace broken essentials before winter hits. In April 2025, U.S. wine exports to Canada plummeted by an astonishing 93%, the steepest decline in over 2 decades. But this wasn't a blip in trade data. It was a warning flare for an entire industry and a sign of how quickly America's economic base can unravel under pressure. At the heart of the crisis is California's Lodi region, a pillar of American wine production. Their revenues dropped by 30 to 35% in just one season. Fields were abandoned, machinery went silent, vineyard owners canceled contracts, and workers, many of them seasonal laborers with few safety nets, were sent home without notice.
I've had multiple farmers in the last week reach out, and other winemakers saying that, hey, there's a vineyard here in Sonoma that the farmer can't find a buyer and they're giving the grapes away. All you need to do is come and pick the grapes out of the vineyard and you can.
RNDC, one of the largest distributors, began preparations to cut nearly 1,700 jobs across Los Angeles and Sacramento. Marketing teams were dissolved, bottling lines slowed to a crawl, and the pain didn't stop at the production level. Due to heavy reliance on imported materials like glass bottles, corks, and label stock, the cost of making a single bottle of wine has surged by 20 to 35%. For consumers, that means higher prices at grocery stores and restaurants. For small businesses, it means shrinking margins, fewer customers, and decisions about whether to cut hours or shut down altogether. But what's more alarming is the ripple effect. The wine industry doesn't stand alone. It's deeply entangled with trucking, printing, packaging, tourism, and even health sectors that depend on ethanol derivatives. When one link snaps, the others bend dangerously close to breaking. Even restaurants and bars, many already struggling post-pandemic, are scaling back. They're reducing shifts, slashing wages, and cutting stock. For service workers, it's another round of financial instability. For the broader economy, it's a loss of consumer spending and tax revenue. All of this from a sector that once contributed over $31 billion to the U.S. economy. A sector now eroding quietly under the weight of disappearing markets, skyrocketing input costs, and a foreign policy that treats economic fallout as collateral damage. This isn't just a wine story. It's a clear, bitter taste of what happens when trade wars come home. The wine crisis was just the beginning. As Canadian buyers vanished from store shelves, they also disappeared from hotel lobbies, outlet malls, and beaches across America. In key states like New York and Florida, Canadian tourism has dropped by up to 60%, triggering a wave of cancellations, lost revenue, and shuttered storefronts. Canadians once loyal visitors are now choosing to stay home or spend elsewhere. And like the wine sector, tourism is revealing just how quickly political decisions can gut entire industries without firing a single shot. What's happening now isn't just delay, it's disintegration. America's once reliable supply chains, especially in the auto industry, are buckling under the pressure of tariffs, trade barriers, and redirected trust. For decades, the US and Canada operated as deeply integrated manufacturing partners. Auto parts crossed the border 6 to 7 times during production, moving through a web of suppliers' plants and transport routes in perfect coordination. But that system is now unraveling. Tariffs have disrupted the delicate balance, triggering material shortages, shipping delays, and stalled factory lines in states like Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky. Investment in new production has frozen, expansion plans have been shelved, and the consequences don't stop at cars. The same breakdown is hitting sectors like agriculture, construction, and retail. When the supply chain breaks, shelves stay empty, costs skyrocket, and productivity grinds to a halt. This is no longer a temporary disruption. It's a systemic fracture, and it's happening in slow motion until it suddenly isn't. It all started with one move. On April 3, 2025, the United States imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian-made vehicles not covered under the USMCA agreement. At first glance, it looked like just another bold trade maneuver. But beneath the headlines, that single policy decision shattered one of the most advanced and tightly integrated industrial partnerships in the world. Canada sends 85% of its vehicles to the U.S., a flow built on decades of cross-border cooperation, shared infrastructure, and synchronized production. In this system, auto parts move between plants in both countries as many as 7 times before a car reaches a dealership. It's not just trade, it's co-manufacturing. And Trump's tariff turned that ecosystem into a minefield. Within days, the damage became visible. In Windsor, Ontario, a Stellantis plant furloughed 600 workers as operations stalled. In Michigan and Ohio, suppliers held off on new contracts, faced mounting uncertainty, and cut overtime. Tooling shops transport fleets and raw material providers. All of them began to feel the tremors. Investments froze, orders slowed, trust eroded. What was once a seamless just-in-time production chain was now a gridlocked system choked by red tape, unexpected costs, and retaliatory hesitation. Even small towns that relied on one factory or trucking route to stay afloat began to feel the weight of that one tariff. And this wasn't just about autos. This was about signaling to the world that even your closest partners can become targets overnight, that no agreement, no legacy, and no shared interest is safe from political calculation. In trying to win a trade war, the US had just fired the first shot at its own reflection. Canada didn't just respond, it retaliated with precision. A $30 billion counter-tariff package hit back at the core of American exports: autos, steel, wine, and agriculture. A matching 25% tax on US cars entering Canada was just the beginning. But this wasn't only about numbers, it was about breaking dependence. Prime Minister Mark Carney vowed to cause maximum damage to the US economy, and a national Buy Canadian movement exploded overnight. Shoppers turned their backs on US brands, importers rewrote contracts, even longtime allies began looking elsewhere. These two decisions, one bold, one retaliatory, set off the domino effect behind everything: empty hotels, lost factory jobs, wine crises, supply chain meltdowns. Not by accident, not by natural disaster, but by design. As the damage piled up, lost jobs, price spikes, shuttered supply chains. President Trump took to the podium and declared a win. Canada had withdrawn its digital services tax, and the White House rushed to label it a diplomatic victory. Officials praised the move as proof that America's tough stance was working, that pressure had made allies back down. But behind the photo ops and speeches, something else was unfolding. Factories were quiet, vineyards were bleeding, small towns were emptying, and average Americans were being asked to accept soaring prices and disappearing paychecks, all while being told that this was a triumph. So the question is, what kind of victory comes with this much collateral damage? And who exactly is paying for it? From rising grocery bills to frozen factory lines, from the collapse of wine exports to the mass exit of Canadian tourists. Every consequence we've covered points in the same direction. The cost of this trade war is landing squarely on the shoulders of ordinary Americans. So now we ask you, was it worth it? Was this the victory we were promised? Or just the public dressed-up version of a private collapse? Share your thoughts in the comments. Are you feeling the impact? We want to hear your voice because no one else seems to be listening.
I put out a statement today about farmers. Our farmers are being hurt badly by, they have very good workers. They've worked for them for 20 years.
The markets I lost personally, it averaged about between $50,000 and $70,000 a year for 4 years running. Well, roughly $250,000.
Farmers have been the target of trade wars before, like in Trump's first term, when agricultural exports plummeted by more than $27 billion.
I don't know where it ends. I hope it ends soon.
There were no tweets, no press conference, no protests. The headlines stayed quiet, but the contracts didn't. One by one, long-standing wheat deals, many lasting over a decade, simply disappeared, not with confrontation or outrage, but with silence. Since early 2025, more than 40 countries, including the Philippines, Egypt, Italy, and South Korea, have quietly reduced or halted their wheat imports from the United States. No press statements, no trade wars, just a growing list of nations choosing to buy from someone else. In Kansas, wheat fields are no longer harvested for sale. Some farmers burn entire crops or repurpose them as livestock feed, not to make a statement, but because no buyers remain. The prices dropped to $5.40 per bushel, the lowest in 5 years, leaving farmers without options. Meanwhile, in countries like the Philippines, bread still fills the shelves, but the flour inside now comes from Canada, not America. This wasn't a boycott or a backlash. It was a shift, deliberate, quiet, and deeply unsettling. So how did this happen without a single public warning? And why is Canada, once considered a minor player, now replacing the U.S. as the world's wheat supplier, even on America's home turf? By the summer of 2025, the economic damage to American farmers could no longer be ignored. The numbers weren't abstract, they were personal, painful, and increasingly permanent. National farm income is expected to fall by 3.3% this year, with wheat growers alone losing approximately $400 million in projected revenue. These aren't just seasonal setbacks, they're structural signs of an industry unraveling under quiet but relentless pressure. For many, the losses aren't just measured in income, but in survival.
We're just bringing in our silage bales, and silage is something we feed to our cows over the winter, and we spread a little bit of fertilizer to make sure that there's enough there.
Fertilizer prices are up this spring with tight supplies of nearly all products. Market experts say potash prices are up 25% at around $320 per ton.
Across the Midwest, farmers face an impossible equation. Fertilizer prices continue climbing, with 85% of the supply still imported from Canada, while fuel and agricultural machinery remain prohibitively expensive. Every season demands more investment but yields fewer returns. The break-even line keeps moving out of reach, and for thousands of family-run farms, the math no longer works. Behind these local struggles lies a far bigger warning sign. America is on track to record a $49.5 billion agricultural trade deficit in the 2025 fiscal year, a figure that shatters every historical precedent. For a country that once fed not just its own people but half the world, this moment marks a dramatic reversal. The U.S. isn't just losing contracts, it's losing its role. What does it mean when the richest agricultural power in history begins to import more food than it exports? And if a product as foundational and symbolic as wheat is now being quietly abandoned by buyers across the globe, is this just a market correction, or is it the first crack in something much larger? The collapse wasn't loud. It didn't come with sanctions, tariffs, or boycotts. Instead, it arrived in silence through canceled orders, red ink, and empty freight cars. As one nation after another quietly turned away from U.S. wheat, the damage began sinking deep into the American heartland state by state, farm by farm. In the Philippines, officials made no public criticism. They simply stopped buying. The result, Kansas, the proud wheat basket of America, saw storage silos overflow by 40%. Trains that once rumbled daily with grain shipments now sit idle on rusting tracks, the harvest waiting for buyers who never come. South Korea, once a dependable trade partner, walked away after multiple shipments of U.S. wheat exceeded acceptable glyphosate residue level. In response, farmers in Washington were forced to abandon traditional wheat varieties and shift to flax, desperation, not innovation, driving the transition. In France, it wasn't chemicals that raised red flags, but carbon. USC's wheat failed to meet stringent environmental certification standards, prompting a full pivot to Canadian suppliers. Nebraska, heavily dependent on European contracts, lost its largest buyers overnight. Property taxes tied to land values plummeted, stripping local governments of critical education and infrastructure funds. Mexico didn't walk away because of price or quality, but because of red tape. Customs delays and cross-border logistics snarls pushed Mexican importers to seek more reliable routes. In Texas, where those shipments once arrived daily, dozens of agricultural cooperatives have shut their doors, many for good. And beyond these flashpoints, a quieter exodus continues. Countries like Egypt, Indonesia, and Italy are reducing American wheat intake not in protest, but out of uncertainty. Price volatility, shipping delays, and regulatory inconsistency have chipped away at the one thing no trade policy can fix once it's gone trust. So when the world quietly walks away and the farms that fed it begin to fail, how long before America realizes it wasn't global demand that changed, but its own reliability? Behind every data point is a voice. And in 2025, those voices have turned from quiet concern to open distress. In Illinois, once a proud pillar of American grain farmers are speaking out. Input costs have exploded, one wheat grower said, and prices at harvest are so low we can't hold on much longer. His frustration isn't just economic, it's existential. For many, farming isn't just a job, it's a way of life passed down for generations. Now that legacy hangs by a thread.
A few days ago, the USDA reported that the number of farms in America plunged by 140,000 in the past 5 years. That's roughly 2,500 farms going bust every month.
In Indiana, the pain goes beyond the fields. We were just starting to recover after the stimulus programs ended, explained a representative from a major family-owned operation. And then Washington hits us with new tariffs on Chinese shipping. Our freight costs jumped over 40%. How are we supposed to move our product when the government itself makes it more expensive to export? At the national level, the alarm bells are no longer subtle. The National Association of Wheat Growers issued a stark warning. We fear the complete loss of the U.S. wheat industry, just like we lost oats. This isn't a temporary downturn. It's a long-term erosion of trust. These aren't abstract concerns or partisan talking points. They're first-hand accounts from the front lines of an industry in crisis. When the people who grow the food no longer believe in the system that supports them, what happens next? While the United States struggled with shrinking markets and internal disarray, a quiet contender stepped into the spotlight without ever asking for it. In 2025, Canada's wheat exports are projected to grow by 4%, reaching approximately 26.5 million metric tons. It's not a surge driven by subsidies or flashy trade deals. It's a reflection of something deeper: trust earned through consistency, neutrality, and preparedness. Unlike the U.S., Canada's wheat inventory has remained stable, hovering around 15.4 million tons, giving buyers the confidence that orders will be fulfilled on time and without political entanglements. In a global market where uncertainty has become the norm, predictability is a premium, and Canada quietly offers exactly that. The shift wasn't accidental. As the U.S. imposed new tariffs on Chinese shipping vessels, raising transport costs for its own exporters, Canada found itself with an unexpected advantage. Without making any bold declarations or seeking confrontation, it simply moved in to fill the vacuum. Canadian wheat began flowing into the same ports the U.S. once dominated, not because it was cheaper, but because it was steady. No speeches, no retaliation, no slogans, just action. And perhaps that's what made the shift so powerful. While America made headlines, Canada made deliveries. So the question now isn't how Canada rose, it's why so few in the US saw it coming. The collapse of wheat exports didn't just echo in boardrooms or foreign ports. It hit home in school cafeterias, rural clinics, and county tax offices across America. In agricultural states where land value and crop output form the backbone of local economies, the effects were immediate and unforgiving. Rural school districts reported growing budget shortfalls as property tax revenues tied closely to farmland valuations began to plummet. Local hospitals already under strain were forced to reduce services, lay off staff, or shutter entire departments. The wounds were not only economic, they were human. Minnesota, once hailed as the wheat capital of the Midwest, offers a stark example of this retreat. With international contracts gone and storage overflowing, the state made a quiet but symbolic move. It shut down its export division entirely. Instead, wheat was redirected to ethanol plants not for global trade, but for domestic fuel production. It was a pivot born not of strategy, but of necessity. Even the logistics sector, often seen as the engine that keeps trade alive, has begun to seize up. Warehouses sit underutilized, rail lines underused, and equipment purchases frozen. "No one's investing in new machinery anymore," said one agricultural supplier in Iowa. Why would they, when there's no guarantee we'll sell the next crop? This isn't just a trade issue. It's a rural crisis unfolding in real time. One missed shipment, one lost contract, one closed school at a time. How long before these silent fractures in America's breadbasket start to reshape the nation's political and social landscape? If global trust in U.S. wheat can unravel over a few late deliveries and red tape, what does that signal for America's broader export credibility? Buyers didn't leave because the wheat was poor. They left because the system felt unreliable. In trade, perception is everything. Once confidence breaks, countries don't wait for fixes, they move on. Now that same doubt is creeping into far more critical sectors: semiconductors, electric vehicles, even artificial intelligence. Innovation alone isn't enough. What buyers want is reliability, and that can't be replaced with slogans. Because trust doesn't come back with promises. It returns only through consistency and proof. If wheat lost the world's trust this quietly, what's next for everything stamped Made in USA? America's wheat wasn't rejected for its quality, but for its unpredictability. The issue isn't what we produce, but how we deliver and respond when things go wrong. To regain trust, the U.S. must fix the basics faster: logistics, clear standards, and reliable execution. Buyers don't want promises, they want consistency. Canada didn't win by shouting, it won by showing up quietly and on time. Because in global trade, trust isn't declared. It's earned shipment by shipment, contract by contract. But what do you think? Have you seen signs that global buyers are quietly shifting away from Made in USA labels in other industries too? Do you believe trust in American exports can still be restored? Or is this a warning that goes far beyond agriculture? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about what no one else is saying. And if this story made you stop and think, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to see what's happening beneath the headlines.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for...
Greenland is an okay name for a country, but what about if we call it Trumpland instead?
We need to work with ourselves, with Greenlanders.
Trump made headlines with a dramatic proclamation the United States would move to annex Greenland in order to secure its vast deposits of strategic minerals. He called it a matter of national security, framing Greenland not just as territory, but as the key to controlling the resources that power electric vehicles, smartphones, missiles, and fighter jets. But while that declaration dominated news cycles and triggered diplomatic backlash, something far more significant happened without a single press conference. Canada, almost unnoticed, finalized a $3 billion mining agreement with Greenland and the European Union. No fanfare, no power play, just deliberate negotiations, environmental commitments, and long-term investment. In the end, it wasn't the loudest voice that won. It was the one that offered stability, transparency, and partnership. So, how did the most powerful country in the world, armed with ambition and urgency, end up watching from the sidelines as its quiet neighbor moved in? Why did Greenland open its doors to Canada and Europe, but not the United States? And more importantly, what does this mean for America's grip on the global supply chain in the age of digital warfare and clean energy? This isn't about frozen territory. It's about the next global power shift and the silent deals that may have already tipped the balance. Neodymium, terbium, dysprosium. To most people, these names mean nothing. But in reality, they're the backbone of the modern world, powering electric vehicles, smartphones, wind turbines, radar systems, missiles, and fifth-generation fighter jets. These aren't just minerals. They're weapons of influence in the digital age. And right now, China controls nearly 90% of their global processing capacity. That's the vulnerability the US doesn't talk about enough. America can mine some rare earths, but it can't process them at scale. Without allies or alternative sources, it remains dangerously exposed. Any disruption, whether political, environmental, or economic, can trigger massive ripple effects. Broken supply chains, rising consumer prices, halted production, and even weakened national defense. Greenland, along with Canada and the EU, represents one of the last real chances to reduce that dependence. If the US fails to secure stable, transparent, and allied sources of these critical materials, it's not just at risk of falling behind, it's at risk of being shut out entirely. This isn't just about geopolitics. It's about your next car, your next phone, and your livelihood. Electric vehicles, smartphones, wind turbines, defense systems, even medical devices all depend on a narrow group of rare earth elements like neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. You'll never see them, touch them, or hear about them in a commercial. But without them, modern life grinds to a halt. And here's the problem: China controls nearly 99% of the global supply of these critical materials. That means a single policy shift, export restriction, or geopolitical standoff in Beijing could unleash global ripple effects in a matter of days. For American consumers, that spells trouble. The cost of electric vehicles, already expensive for the average buyer, could spike even higher. Smartphones, laptops, home electronics, and even refrigerators could see prices climb, not because of innovation, but because the materials inside are suddenly harder to get. But the impact doesn't end at the checkout counter. It travels up the supply chain, hitting the industrial core of the US economy. Automakers like Ford, Tesla, Approval, and Rivian, already navigating global competition and tight production cycles, may be forced to slow or suspend operations altogether when they can't secure the magnetic components or features that rely on rare earths. And when production halts, it's not just the assembly lines that stop. It's the people behind them: line workers, engineers, suppliers, truck drivers who lose hours, income, and security. The defense sector faces even more strategic risk. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and others depend on rare earths for precision-guided weapons, advanced radar systems, missile guidance, and next-gen aircraft. A shortage doesn't just delay projects, it can cripple national readiness. Testing gets postponed, deliveries fall behind schedule, and entire defense programs stall. That triggers a cascading dilemma in Washington. If rare earth scarcity drives up the cost of maintaining military superiority, what gives? How does the government balance an inflated defense budget with other domestic priorities? Because when the Pentagon demands more, Congress must choose where to cut. And often the blade falls not on tanks or jets, but on healthcare, public education, infrastructure, and social services. The real cost of geopolitical miscalculation shows up not in headlines, but in school budgets, hospital staffing, and community support programs. In short, what starts as a silent disruption in a little-known supply chain can lead to real-world consequences in every American household. This is no longer just a matter of national security, it's a threat to economic stability, job security, and the everyday quality of life for millions of Americans. And if we can't secure the minerals that power our world, the next crisis won't come from outside. It'll be built into the devices we can no longer afford or produce. While Washington floated the idea of annexation, Greenland was already preparing its answer, and it wasn't subtle. The moment President Trump suggested that the US should purchase Greenland leaders in Nuuk, backed unequivocally by the Prime Minister of Denmark, issued a firm and public rejection.
I think it's a strange thing to do. I think it's a strange thing to threaten our allied countries, and I don't understand what he...
Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark, was never...
The message echoed around the world. Greenland is not for sale, not up for negotiation, and certainly not subject to pressure from any foreign power. This wasn't just a diplomatic rebuttal. It was an assertion of identity. Over the years, Greenland has been building its international presence through environmental stewardship, resource diplomacy, and regional cooperation. It has shown the world that it doesn't want to be a pawn in Arctic geopolitics, but rather a partner in crafting Arctic policy. So when two global powers came knocking, one with headlines and ambition, The other with quiet agreements and mutual respect, the choice was never about size or strength. It was about trust. Greenland chose the side that offered collaboration, not control. The side that saw its people, not just its minerals. The side that asked rather than assumed. And in doing so, it sent a powerful message not just to Washington, but to every nation eyeing the Arctic sovereignty isn't up for sale. Partnership is the only path forward. What happens when one superpower demands control while another simply offers cooperation? While America framed Greenland as a strategic asset to be secured, Canada and the European Union approached it as a partner. Quietly and deliberately, they signed a $3 billion mining agreement, one that prioritized environmental safeguards, local consultation, and long-term economic development. This wasn't conquest, it was cooperation, and it worked. For the U.S., this moment should have been a turning point, a chance to pivot from territorial ambition to mutual gain. Greenland never rejected investment. In fact, as early as 2019, it welcomed U.S. exploration and mining efforts. But those opportunities came with clear conditions: transparency, sustainability, and respect for Greenlandic self-governance. If America had chosen to lead with partnership, perhaps through a bilateral or multilateral strategy focused on midstream processing and clean extraction, it could have secured the same access without the backlash. Because in this new Arctic game, the winner isn't the one who claims the most land. It's the one who builds trust, stability, and shared benefit, and does so before the contracts are signed by someone else. In the icy waters off Greenland's coast, Canada is preparing to deploy a floating liquefied natural gas facility, a strategic move that could redraw the energy map of the Arctic and offer a lifeline to regions hungry for new sources of power. Its destination markets are clear: Asia and Europe, two regions racing to secure energy independence in a world no longer defined by US-Russia dominance. For them, Greenland's untapped reserves represent more than just another pipeline, they symbolize a fresh start. But the transformation doesn't stop with gas. Beneath Greenland's rugged terrain lies a treasure chest of critical minerals: gold, silver, copper, and molybdenum. These are the raw materials behind the batteries that will drive tomorrow's electric cars, store renewable energy, and power the next generation of global infrastructure. Rather than be pulled into a tug-of-war between Washington and Beijing, Greenland is quietly carving its own path, one built on diversified extraction, long-term sustainability, and strategic alliances that prioritize respect and stability over dominance and control. And in doing so, Greenland is positioning itself not as a prize to be won, but as a power broker. In the energy future the world hasn't yet fully seen coming, Greenland is no longer an empty frontier waiting to be claimed. The era of Arctic silence is over. Canada and the European Union are already reshaping the region, not through military posturing or territorial claims, but through soft alliances, environmental commitments, and targeted investment. Meanwhile, the United States, once viewed as the natural leader in global energy and defense, now risks falling behind. So as the Arctic transforms quietly, rapidly, and permanently, where does that leave America? Will it find a way to lead through partnership and shared purpose? Or will it watch from the sidelines as others define the rules of this new northern game? What do you think? Is the U.S. ready to change its approach before it's too late? Or has it already missed the moment? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you. Do you believe trust in American exports can still be restored? Or is this a warning that goes far beyond agriculture? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about what no one else is saying. And if this story made you stop and think, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to see what's happening beneath the headlines.
Mexico is deciding that as of June this year, they are no longer going to be importing any sort of biotech corn from the United States, which is a massive problem.
$1 billion of soy exports. So we've got farmers, cattle ranchers, and guess what now? Now it's corn.
The U.S. has lost the corn crown. We've been the world's top exporter of corn for just about every single year in history. Now, that's changing.
What happens when the world quietly walks away from the very grain that built American farming? No headlines, no public outrage, just rejected shipments, canceled contracts, and fields left untouched, not because they failed to grow, but because no one wants the harvest. Corn, once a symbol of American abundance, is now being turned away at international borders. Prices are stuck near $4 per bushel, dangerously close to the point where harvesting leads to deeper losses. Across the Midwest, farmers are choosing to let crops rot rather than pay to collect them. And all the while, there's no scandal, no war, no climate shock, just a low invisible withdrawal. Buyers aren't protesting, they're quietly replacing. In the background, Canada is seizing opportunity without fanfare. Their corn isn't louder, it's cleaner, more consistent, and crucially more trusted. So why is the world rejecting America's most iconic crop? The fallout isn't contained. It's spreading like a slow wave across America's agricultural core. In Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, and Missouri, the 6 states that once powered the world's corn supply, farmers are watching their livelihoods dissolve. Corn shipments are being turned away at international borders. Buyers no longer call. Contracts that once guaranteed income for years are vanishing overnight. At $4 per bushel, farmers are losing money just to bring in the crop. The average loss now hovers around $160 per acre. In response, many aren't even harvesting. Why would they? Every gallon of fuel, every hour of labor, every machine switched on just adds to the red ink. So, the corn stays in the field left to rot, not because of drought or disaster, but because selling it makes the pain worse. Idle harvesters gather dust. Grain elevators sit full with nowhere to send the product. Processing plants scale back or shut down. Local schools funded by agricultural tax revenues are cutting programs. Families are pulling their kids from college because they can't afford gas, let alone tuition. And the workforce is breaking apart. Farmhands, truckers, seasonal workers, everyone tied to the corn economy is being forced to pivot, to leave, or to give up. This isn't just a price dip. It's a slow collapse, acre by acre, county by county. Drive through the Midwest today, and the silence tells you everything. In Iowa, once hailed as the nation's corn capital, the hum of harvesters has vanished. Silos groan under the weight of unsold grain. Processing plants run at half capacity, and in some towns, children stay home not because school is closed, but because their parents can't afford gas to take them there. Cross into Indiana, and you'll find machines frozen in time. The harvesters have no purpose, no customers, no shipments, no point. The entire supply chain from field to freight has stalled. What used to be a finely tuned logistical machine is now a museum of rusting equipment and broken routines. Further west in Illinois, the collapse is hitting harder. This was once a hub, grain moving in every direction, warehouses buzzing. Now, unemployment lines grow longer, and desperate farmers are putting their land on the market. Some are being bought out by foreign investors, including Chinese companies. It's not just corn that's leaving, it's ownership. In Nebraska, the story turns personal. With no exports to sustain them, communities are thinning out. People are leaving. Farming co-ops, once focused on growth and trade, now serve as informal support groups, a space to talk, to grieve, to wonder what's next. Investment is gone. So is momentum. Minnesota paints the same picture with different shades. Schools are shutting down. Storage facilities are overflowing. With no way to move the grain, the entire system backs up and eventually breaks. And in Missouri, the collapse is cascading through logistics. There's no grain to bag, so packaging orders are canceled. Trucks sit idle. Packing plants have gone dark. Diesel consumption has dropped by 25%, dragging down road freight businesses that once served as lifelines for rural economies. These aren't isolated tragedies. They're symptoms of a shared collapse. One crop, one commodity unraveling 6 states at once. Not with a bang, but with the slow suffocation of silence, stagnation, and surrender. This isn't about how much corn America grows, or even how good it is. The problem is deeper and more damaging. Buyers no longer trust the system behind the grain. Years of trade shocks have taken their toll. Sudden tariffs, political interference, shifting safety standards. One year it's allowed, the next it's banned. And behind it all, lingering concerns over chemical residues like glyphosate make each shipment feel like a risk. America is no longer seen as a stable partner. Deals don't feel secure. Buyers hesitate not because the corn is bad, but because they don't know what rules will change next. And in global trade, once trust is broken, business moves on quietly but permanently. While the U.S. struggled with trade wars and political uncertainty, Canada was building trust quietly but relentlessly. It's corn non-GMO, glyphosate-free, every shipment tested and traceable, contracts long-term locked in for 3 to 5 years. Buyers don't get excuses, they get consistency. And here's the question no one in Washington seems to ask. What happens when the world realizes it no longer needs American corn because Canada delivers better faster and with fewer surprises? In 2023, Canada's grain and agri-food exports hit 965 billion CAD, rising 1.4% even as global markets slowed. It didn't happen by chance. Free trade deals with South Korea, Japan, and Germany now bring in billions. Just the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement alone is set to boost exports to South Korea by 32%, worth nearly $1.7 billion. This isn't just smart farming, it's smart policy. The Canadian government backs its farmers with insurance, transparent quality control, modern tech, and strong trade teams. They don't pick fights, they don't politicize food. And in a world hungry for stability, that's what buyers are truly paying for. When corn collapses, it doesn't fall alone. The shock is rippling outward into livestock, seasonal jobs, rural schools, and entire local economies. With grain contracts gone and corn prices unprofitable, feed mills are shutting down. That means feed costs are rising fast, and farmers unable to absorb the spike are being forced to sell off their livestock early, often at a loss. It's a chain reaction that doesn't stop at the farm gate. No contracts means no income. No income means mortgages go unpaid. Foreclosures across agricultural counties have surged by more than 30%, and the damage isn't just financial, it's generational. Because when families lose the land, they lose something deeper, the belief that farming is still a future worth building. In community after community, young people are walking away from the profession not in protest, but in quiet surrender. Food stamp applications have spiked in states like Iowa, Indiana, and Minnesota. Meanwhile, online marketplaces like Craigslist are flooded with secondhand tractors, combines, and tools, signs of a livelihood being dismantled piece by piece. This isn't just a corn problem. It's a system under stress. And in many places, that system is already breaking. For decades, the world looked to America to set the gold standard in agriculture. From its massive yields to its export dominance, the U.S. wasn't just a supplier, it was the model others tried to copy. Countries like Brazil, Australia, and much of the European Union studied the U.S. playbook, adopted its industrial farming methods, and even shaped trade policies to match. But somewhere along the way, the student became the competitor. Today, those very countries are no longer trying to follow America. They're quietly leaving it behind. And they're doing it by embracing the new global rulebook, cleaner supply chains, strict carbon requirements, transparent inspections, ease, and traceability from farm to fork. While America clings to outdated systems and politicized regulation, others have adapted quickly and with precision. It's no longer enough to produce high volumes. Buyers want predictability, they want environmental integrity, and above all, they want trust. And in this new marketplace, size doesn't guarantee leadership. America, once the unchallenged hub of global food trade, has become just one option among many, and increasingly not the preferred one. The shift didn't happen in protest. It happened in silence. No announcements, no declarations. Just rerouted shipments, quietly canceled contracts, and trading partners who stopped picking up the phone. The world hasn't launched a campaign against U.S. agriculture. It simply chose to move forward without it. If corn, the most iconic, most cultivated crop in America, is no longer welcome on the world stage, then what's truly safe? What happens when soybeans face the same rejection? When dairy exports dry up, when international buyers start turning away from American beef, wheat, or poultry, not because of quality, but because the system behind them is no longer trusted. And more pressing still, what happens when farmers themselves stop believing? Because this isn't just about grain, it's about confidence. It's about generational faith in an industry that once built communities, fed the world, and defined American strength. Now that faith is fading, not with a crash, but with a slow daily unraveling, millimeter by millimeter, season by season. And still there is no national reckoning, no coordinated response, just silence. Contracts vanish, markets shift, Canada rises, and Washington debates. The world won't wait for America to get its act together. It's already moving on. And if we don't act now, the phrase agricultural superpower won't describe our future. It will define our past. But maybe the bigger question isn't just about corn or soy or even farming. Maybe it's this: what happens to a country when the people who feed it no longer believe it's worth staying? That's not a policy issue. That's a national identity crisis. So now we ask you, who do you think is responsible for this quiet collapse? The policymakers, the markets, Or is it the years of complacency that no one wanted to name? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. And if you believe stories like this need to be told clearly, truthfully, and before it's too late, hit subscribe. Because this isn't just about agriculture. It's about what kind of country we choose to be while we still have the choice.
I never thought I was going to lose this much money, this fast.
South Florida farmers say they're in trouble. Crops are rotting on the vine, and they're blaming the ongoing trade wars and immigration changes.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
The American tariffs, the new tariffs on steel and aluminum, are unlawful, unjustified, and illogical. I agree with you.
There were no sirens, no headlines, and certainly no farewell speeches. Yet somewhere along the way, the United States quietly lost the ally it once considered unshakable. Canada, the calm, steady neighbor who stood beside us through wars, crises, and economic upheaval, has begun to drift away not out of anger or retaliation, but because something far more profound has eroded trust. While Washington remained consumed with tariff battles and the politics of America, First Ottawa was already taking calculated steps to untangle itself from the grip of U.S. dependence. Billions of dollars were quietly withdrawn from American investment. Defense contracts were redirected toward European partners, and supply chains were methodically restructured to reduce exposure to Washington's volatility. It wasn't a rebellion. It was preparation for a future in which Canada no longer assumes the United States will be reliable, stable, or even present. What makes this rupture even more unsettling is the way it unfolded not with outrage or threats, but with silence. Canada didn't announce a pivot. It didn't seek a fight. It simply acted calmly, decisively, and without permission. And that silence speaks louder than any protest ever could. The question now is, what exactly has Canada been building quietly, methodically, while America wasn't paying attention? As Canada quietly reshapes its trade alliances, it's not politicians or CEOs who feel the first shockwaves, it's ordinary American families. In April 2025, consumer confidence collapsed to 50.8, the lowest it's been since the dark days of the pandemic. A single-month drop of 11% may not make headlines, but it reveals something deeper. Americans are no longer just anxious. They're losing faith in the economy altogether. And who could blame them? By May, prices for everyday essentials, washing machines, refrigerators, kitchen appliances spiked by 4.3%, the sharpest jump in nearly 5 years. A machine that cost $900 just months ago is now pushing past $1,000. And for a working-class family already juggling rent, healthcare, and gas, that difference hits hard. It doesn't end in the laundry room. Even online, where price competition once protected consumers, the pain is real. A study of over 1,400 Chinese imported products sold on Amazon showed prices had risen by 6% since January, more than double the general CPI increase for goods. That might sound small in percentage terms, but over a month it's an extra $100 here, $50 there. By year's end, some families are looking at a $1,000 gap without having bought anything extra. Then came the real gut punch: raw material costs. Trump's decision to raise tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel from 25% to 50% caused a shock in domestic markets. Aluminum prices shot up by 54%, steel rose 7 to 8%, and nearly overnight the backbone of American manufacturing grew heavier and more expensive. Car prices surged as a result. A $30,000 vehicle might now cost you $400 to $500 to $6,000 more. That's not a luxury tax. That's the difference between owning a car and giving up on the idea of one altogether. And even simple pleasures are slipping away. Aluminum can costs have forced beverage companies like Corona's parent firm to scale back. Six-packs are more expensive. Inventory is thinning. The price of a cold beer on a summer weekend, one of the last affordable joys for many Americans, is now just another sacrifice in a trade war they didn't ask for. Meanwhile, factories are going quiet. The ISM Manufacturing Index dropped to 49.0 in June, marking 4 consecutive months of contraction. New orders are slowing, operating costs are climbing, and behind closed doors, plant managers are preparing for what comes next: layoffs. This isn't just economic turbulence. It's a slow-motion squeeze that's leaving families with less security, fewer options, and rising resentment. And maybe that's the most painful part of all. Because while politicians in Washington boast about protecting American jobs and industry, it's the American worker, the truck driver, the factory technician, the single mother stocking her fridge who ends up carrying the cost. So we have to ask, in trying so hard to win the trade war, did we forget who we were supposed to be fighting for? In early 2025, the fragile trade relationship between the US and Canada shattered, not with a diplomatic breakdown, but with a tariff. The Trump administration, doubling down on its protectionist playbook, reimposed a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum. The justification to defend American industry. But for Canada, this wasn't just another policy shift, it was the final straw in a long, unsteady relationship. Within days, Ottawa struck back with countermeasures, setting off a fresh trade war between two of the world's closest economic partners. It wasn't the first time tariffs had entered the conversation, but this time something was different. The tone coming out of Washington had grown colder, more unilateral, and unmistakably dismissive of long-standing alliances. Canada, once patient and cooperative, now responded with action instead of words. Steel exports from Canada to the US plummeted. While the flow didn't completely stop, the shift was undeniable. Exporters who had depended on US buyers for decades began pivoting toward Europe and Asia markets that didn't threaten them with unpredictable penalties or public humiliation. Factories in Ontario and Quebec, once tightly integrated with American supply chains, began realigning their logistics. Some businesses rewrote contracts to favor EU buyers. Others negotiated new shipping routes toward South Korea, Vietnam, and Germany. Canada wasn't waiting for the US to change its mind. It was adapting to a new world without it. And as Canada moved on, it wasn't just about economics, it was about principle. The message was clear: trade based on threats is not trade based on trust. For years, the US had assumed that proximity and history would keep Canada tethered. But now, Trump's aggressive stance had created the opposite effect. It gave Canada something it hadn't had in decades, a reason to look elsewhere. What began as a tariff dispute quickly evolved into a structural divorce. Quiet, methodical, and irreversible. And here's the irony. The harder Washington pushed to control the relationship, the faster Canada learned to live without it. In a quiet but decisive move, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada would reach its NATO defense spending target of 2% of GDP by the end of the fiscal year, 5 years ahead of schedule. But more striking than the numbers was the message: Canada was reducing its dependence on the United States. Carney emphasized that future military procurement, including programs like the F-35, would increasingly come from Europe. This wasn't just about diversifying suppliers, it was about shifting alliances. While Washington remained distracted by domestic battles, Ottawa was building new bridges. Canada began formal talks with the EU on a bilateral defense framework, potentially the first of its kind between Europe and North America, without US involvement. For decades, America assumed Canada's loyalty came naturally, but this pivot showed otherwise. Canada is no longer waiting. It's redefining its security strategy on its own terms and with new partners. The breakup may be quiet, but it's already underway. Canada never held a press conference to declare a break from the United States. It didn't need to. Its actions spoke louder. By increasing defense spending, diversifying supply chains, and forging new defense ties with Europe, Canada has stepped into a posture the world hasn't seen before: confident, self-reliant, and no longer quietly following America's lead. This wasn't just a reaction to tariffs or politics. It was a psychological shift. For decades, Canada accepted its role as a junior partner in the North American alliance. But with Washington growing more unpredictable and unilateral, Ottawa chose not to plead for attention, but to prepare for independence. Ironically, it was Trump's America First doctrine, designed to assert dominance, that triggered the opposite response. Instead of rallying allies, it drove them to rethink their own autonomy. Now, it's not just Canada. European leaders are reassessing their dependencies. In Australia, South Korea, and Japan, quiet conversations are unfolding about reducing reliance on US guarantees and building more self-sufficient strategies. The illusion of automatic loyalty is breaking, and the world is beginning to ask, if Canada can walk away, who might be next? Canada never held a press conference to declare a break from the United States. It didn't need to. Its actions spoke louder. By increasing defense spending, diversifying supply chains, and forging new partnerships with Europe, Canada has stepped into a posture the world hasn't seen before: confident, self-reliant, and no longer quietly following America's lead. This wasn't just a reaction to tariffs or political rhetoric. It was a psychological shift, a quiet decision to stop waiting for Washington to act responsibly and to start preparing for a world where it might not. Ironically, it was Trump's America First doctrine meant to reassert U.S. dominance that sparked a reverse effect. Instead of rallying allies, it drove them to reconsider the relationship altogether. Now, Canada's pivot is being closely watched, and it's not alone. Australia is signing security agreements with the EU. South Korea and Japan are re-evaluating the strategic reliability of the U.S. And in Brussels, a new bilateral defense mechanism with Canada is being shaped, potentially laying the foundation for a transatlantic counterbalance to American influence. The shift is no longer personal, it's global, and it raises a question that Washington can no longer ignore. If even your closest allies are preparing for life without you, how much longer can you still call yourself the leader of the free world? America First was meant to protect working Americans, but today it's everyday families who are paying the highest price. While Canada forges new alliances, secures defense deals, and rewires its economy, American households are left grappling with rising prices, shrinking job prospects, and growing uncertainty. A car now costs thousands more, a fridge an extra $100. Even a six-pack has become a luxury. And while we struggle to keep up, our allies are quietly walking away. No drama, no declarations, just action. Canada's pivot isn't just a trade story, it's a warning. If Washington continues to push allies away and ignore the cost at home, we may not just lose a neighbor, we may lose the foundation of American leadership itself. What if this isn't about Canada leaving us, but about us leaving our own people behind? Do you think America is becoming isolated? Or are we just waking up too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like, share, and subscribe if this story made you stop and think. Because sometimes the biggest losses come quietly, one household at a time.